When working with textures, occasionally you might find that there's seams on your textures where they wrap around an object. Sometimes this is the way that the texture is applied in the 3D software. Sometimes it's just the texture itself. So we're going to pop into Photoshop just briefly, and I'm showing you this video in this module because I feel like I should show it as early as possible so that it might help you if you run into these problems. However, you may not need this for the upcoming exercise. You may just reflect in on this video later on down the road if you're running into these problems. So here we go. I have this wood texture that I was using previously, and as it wraps around my cubes, they have sharp edges, so that's not a big deal if it wraps around in an odd way. But my spheres and other lathe-like objects, it might be a little bit more awkward. So let's see how we can best prep this image to be tileable. And before we get too deep into this, I've got a wood texture applied to a sphere just as an example. I thought it would help make this more clear. And you can see that as I move around my wood, I get that we wouldn't necessarily put wood slats or wood planks on a sphere. But just as an example to show that where this wraps all the way around pretty nicely, this seam is created because that texture doesn't actually loop back onto itself cleanly. So when I go back into Photoshop, we can see that that's happening here in just a moment. So here I have my wood texture, and we can use a filter in Photoshop under Filter, Other, Offset, and by default the offset's going to be 0, 0. But if I filter a few pixels right, you can see that the wood is arranged in a way that it is seamless. It just continues perfectly left and right, and you can't really tell where it starts and stops. Let's go that back down to 0. Vertically, however, very easy to see where it starts and stops and wraps back on itself, okay? So this right here, this seam is what's showing up in Blender and really kind of wrecking our presentation. So let's leave this offset in place. I'm going to use a variety of tools on a daily basis, but for like today, I think maybe just the spot healing brush tool will probably work. Maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller, and I really just want to hit these areas in the middle where you've got this kind of real nasty, real hard-edged seam. And I may just draw up a few times just to smooth that out. I want to be careful. I don't want to create any new errors, but I might go back and forth just to smudge and move. And this is thankfully a bit of a muddy texture anyway, so this adjustment there is probably enough. Now, if I was being really particular, these little hard edges there, not so great. So you might want to get those cleaned up. But on a 3D render on a sphere, maybe this is good enough. Oh, that one there is kind of bothering me the more I look at it. Let's get that brush back. Let's get a little bit smaller on here and just clean that up. That's a little bit better. Not bad. All right, let's do a save on this. So I'm going to save here, one moment. All right, so I was able to save that off onto a separate screen. I want to save it as a PNG file. I want to save it as a copy to my desktop just in case it gives you any of those options. Sometimes when you're a really large image, it tries to do like a PSD cloud file or something like that. To me personally, a little irritating that Photoshop defaults there, but you want to save it to your desktop. So let's pop back into Blender and see what we got. All right, I'm back in Blender and I'm staring down that really nasty seam with my fingers crossed that this will fix our problem. Over in my material settings, if you're not in them right now, you can go to material settings, right? So here's your object settings, materials down below. And here's my dark warm wood that I started with. I'm going to click on the open image dialog and I'm going to select the new seamless image that I just saved. So I've got that popped up. Let's choose the wood dark warm seamless, hit open image, and lovely. Cleans up that seam quite well. So a big improvement based on the work that we did in Photoshop. Now this isn't going to solve all your problems, and as you adjust your images, the seams might show up in other places. So this is an iterative process, but one that you can use to clean up any textures maybe that you pull from the internet that don't quite loop onto one another very well.